Hello, everyone, and welcome to Voice Like a Lion podcast. Today, I'm just going to skip all the formalities and get right into it because I'm so excited and honored, honestly blessed, to have this brother in Christ on the podcast with me. Today, I have George Bryant. There's no introduction that could do this man justice. He has been through the ups, downs, all arounds of the roller coaster of life. He's been the successful entrepreneur. He's been someone who's fought for our country, and now he's helping other people be able to navigate what they are walking through to be able to find what their definition of success is. So, George, welcome to the show.
Brother, it's an honor. From the first time we talked on Instagram, I'm like, yep, brother, home, safe. Like, I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate who you are as a man. Like, I'm honored, humbled, and excited to be here today.
Thank you. It's definitely mutual. And it was honestly, so I reached out just for everyone listening. I reached out to him on Instagram. It was a few months ago, came across him on another podcast. And when you said that you were willing to be on the show, I'm like, oh, this is cool. And then I went and I started looking into you and I went, how is this guy saying yes right now? Like, there's so much that he has done. There's so many things that, and again, it's not because of the success that you're here, it's because of the man that you are. Like the way that you came across in the video, that's what really inspired me because you're just so genuinely intentional. And that was the first thing that drew me in. But take me back. Where did that genuine intentionality come from?
Bro, that's a great question. I'd say the short answer was through copious amounts of pain
Mm,
of living out of alignment, right?
well,
Like, to your point, I think the greatest lesson that God's taught me is humility. And, on paper, I'm a baby Christian, right? Like, I regave my life to Christ by choice in April of this year because as a kid, I was baptized and have been around it my whole life, was accused of being new age. And like, everyone's like, oh, well, you do plant medicine and you talk to shamans and you talk about this. And everyone thought I was running away from him. Like, no, I was trying to find him. I just didn't
yeah.
realize he was here the whole time. And, truthfully, like, I've had a lot of adversity in my life. And most of my life, I chose to see that as the victim, like it was being done to me or it was happening to me. And even in the lens of business and relationships, like through all those chapters and veins of personal development and plant medicine and coaching and therapy and suicide attempts and PTSD and all of these things, the one mistake that I always made was I gave myself full credit for overcoming it. And the moment I did, it was all taken away and I
Mm,
hadn't learned the lessons. And so I've said my whole life that I just care about people and I want people to feel how I didn't feel as a kid. Like, I want people to feel seen and safe and connected and loved, and that everybody belongs at the table because every one of our seats is equal. And I lived in insecurity for so long, and I thought that my value in the world was based on how much money I made or how many accolades I had. Like, you look at my roster, like I tied world records and I did X and I did Y. And like, I used to like identify with those things that like they were my value of worth as a human. And it was through all of those processes and truthfully having a son that I started to realize that I was just living out of alignment. Like, there was so much cognitive dissonance and like I was empty. My heart hurt, my soul hurt, like I couldn't sleep. And as much as there was so much truth to what I was sharing, it felt like I was living a lie because it was never how I authentically was in the moment. It was always this like wrapping paper or status. And I feel like through all of the trials and tribulations, like one of the things that I posted the other day is that oftentimes I pray for things that I don't have the adversity or the character or scars to maintain.
that's good.
And it was like a really big dose of humility. And it feels like my whole life has been a series of me speaking and communicating and teaching the things that I ultimately wanted to be, but I didn't know how to be them. And so teaching it held me accountable. And then eventually it forced me to come into alignment. And I just believe in humanity. Like, I believe in people and love and us putting aside labels and beliefs and politics and the past, and like everything's an opportunity to connect. And I think the perspective is, being in the military, I also learned as a Marine for 13 years and going to some very dark places on the planet and having it easy compared to some of my friends, like in relative like experience of being what's there, that all the things that we fight and we disconnect and we judge people on, when you're in moments where the only thing that matters is your life, none of that stuff matters. And the only thing that matters is people. And I think we have an opportunity to deeply connect with people. And every time I've forgotten that, I've lost really, really hard, and it's put me on my knees. And I genuinely believe that we are a community and culture of people. And without people, we don't win. And all too often, we just expect people to show up and we want them to support. But relationships have a leader and a follower. And like, you got to give before you get, and you got to operate that way. And so I now think about the example I am for my son, and how, speaking into somebody or just taking the time to send a message or sit down and have a conversation is the difference between, somebody's failure or success. And if I look back at the reason I'm alive, it's because God had angels that just showed up in my life that didn't wait for me to invite them in.
Amen.
They just put themselves in and spoke into me, and were like right there with a lending hand or a heart. And like, that's the legacy I want to leave my son.
That's, dude, this is going to be great because there's so much correlation between what you're saying and even my own story. There's something that you said earlier. Well, there's two things. One, you talked about giving your life back to Christ earlier this year. Congratulations. That's amazing. And it's crazy to me, though. For me, 4 years ago, I did that. And I grew up in church. I literally feel like I was born in church. I was always under the pew, drawing on the bottom of the pew. I went to every activity. I was always in church. So I knew of God, but I didn't know God. And when I put my faith fully in a man, I remember this very well because he was my mentor. He took me under his wing, and this was my first time experiencing God. And then he made this rash decision, and he basically transitioned out from being our youth pastor overnight after he said he wasn't going to. And that just took the wind from my sails. And I didn't understand it. And I've literally ran from Christ for about 10 years. It took 10 years to basically get me back into church. And every single time, because I had read the Bible, I had gone through it, I knew it. And when I would show up at church, like, oh, they're going to preach about this, and this, I don't care. I already know all this. And it's been such a journey over these last 4 years, being able to go actually walk life with him and not just know about him. Knowing him and have the same thing that you were saying is having a relationship is way different. Even when we talk about it, you and I are sitting here having a conversation. If I was just talking at you and that's all we did for the next 30, 45 minutes, that is not a relationship. There's no relationship there. Or if I sent you a letter and you sat there and you read it and that was it, you didn't write me back, you didn't call, you didn't respond on Instagram, none of those things, that is not a relationship. So actually having a relationship has changed everything. Now, with the caveat of it's not always been the easiest choices. There's a lot of times, so many times, where the obedience steps has been some of the most painful steps in my entire life. I mean, for me, one of those was almost going on 3 years now, which is crazy, where we had $1 million business my wife and I had created. It literally went to $1 million in 12 months. It went from 0 to $1 million. And then I remember very specifically, we had everything that we had really prayed for at this moment. And the Lord said, hey, I want that back. I want you to shut it down. I remember he spoke through my wife, said, hey, I feel like this is what we're supposed to do. I went and prayed about it and I agreed. Hey, you're right. I feel like it's what we're supposed to do. And then we're on this mountaintop. We're coaching people. We're mentoring. We're having a mastermind. We're doing webinars. And within the span of 90 days from saying yes, the business went away. We had 2 Airbnbs. One of those went away. We had employees. We had to help them be able to transition. The home that we were renting, we were basically getting kicked out of it because they wanted to sell it. And then we went from having all this income to no income. And we go, what just happened? 90 days later, we're having to move in with family. And so how did we get here? It's like we were just the shining example. We were the ones who was like, hey, you guys need to be more like Stephen and Brittany because they were the ones changing generational curses. Like how did we go from that to then where we're sitting there and having to fight for every meal, and we're sitting there having to fight for rent, we're sitting there having to, figure out what we're going to do with the car. It's like, how did we even get here?
Yeah. Bro, it reminds me of church on Sunday. But also my current life, right? Like I'm navigating a divorce, co-parenting my son, and all it reminds me of, and we were talking about this before we hit record, and I'm going to tie all this together because it's so powerful. But like, I'm known as a guy who like consumes a lot and has a lot of information. And for everything that everybody accused me of being new age, I went down every route: Buddhism, Advaita, personal development, unattachment, plant medicine. every personal development book, every mindset book. I read the psychology manual, the DSM cover to cover. I've had the best coaches, the best mentors. And to our point before the show, the absolute best business or life book that you can ever read, regardless of your faith, is the Bible.
Yeah.
And it's been this continual lesson for me. And I'll own this. I get jealous of some people like apologetics, like Cliff and Stuart Konechsky, who can like just off the
Yep.
top, right? Or Bryce, that like 21-year-old kid that like the Holy Spirit lives in his body, right? But to your point earlier, is like, I'm a little baby in my relationship with my father, and learning how to navigate that and how to come to my father and come from a place of love and acceptance. But it reminds me of like, if you build your treasures on earth, you'll lose them forever. And if you build them in heaven, you'll have them for eternity. And the hardest part has been my flesh or my perspective
Mm-hmm.
in those moments, coming back to faith and being obedient. And even at church on Sunday, like they pulled up a clip of The Chosen, and it just spoke to my soul, because it was when they were rocking the Roman mile, because we've been doing this series on the good roads and how the good road spreads the message. And there were 54,000 miles of roads in Rome.
Wow.
And our interstate system in the United States was actually built identically to these stones, and it was inspired by it. And there was a standing Roman law that if Roman soldiers were walking and you were out, they could tap you on the shoulder with their spear, and you'd have to drop everything you had. And you were obligated by law to walk their gear for 1 mile, 1,000 paces. And the clip of The Chosen was when Jesus and his people were tapped. They got to the mile, everybody dropped, and he just kept going. And he dropped that famous line of like, when man asks you to walk 1, always go 2. And it's like, the purpose of it is the perspective. And it says that when your focus is on the cross, you realize that sacrifice is an act of service, and it shifts your perspective. And I feel like if I had to summarize the last like 4 years of my life, of like, to your same point, I've had it multiple times. I was a food blogger, and I was making multi 7 figures doing it all, but I was living a lie. Like my identity was this false identity on social media. And I ended up in the jungle with ayahuasca, which I would never do again. But it was a shaman who wouldn't let me drink the medicine. And this is going to sound so crazy, but he said, you've never been quiet enough to hear God's whispers. And until you are, I can't let you in with this medicine. I was like, wait, did a shaman just tell me about God? Like, yeah,
Well,
kind of, like totally. And I'll
yeah.
never forget that night, because I was like, I can't keep this business. We were like 3 weeks away from bankruptcy. My soon to be ex-wife was pregnant. I called everybody, and they're like, you can't do that. Sell it, sell it, sell it. I'm like, no, that's not what my heart says. My heart says I got to walk away. I made one phone call to a buddy, and I was like, you have an audience like mine, take the whole company. And like literally by the skin of my teeth, I ended up in a room and became a consultant accidentally, and everybody hired me. And all of a sudden, God just flooded me
Well,
with possibility and opportunity. And even during COVID, like I was doing a couple $100,000 a month. And within a matter of 90 days, everything was gone. Everything. Businesses shut down. My mastermind shut down because they were all Amazon businesses. Every like 7-figure consulting contract was pulled. Nobody had the money. And I remember this now. And God was speaking to me then, even when I wasn't home with him. And I was like, I need to go hike in the mountains till I find clarity.
well,
That was my like grand idea. So I hiked for like 20 days. And one day I ended up sitting on top of a mountain, just on a rock. And now that I know and I'm learning how to discern the voice of God, I sat there, and the only thought I had is, why have you had a podcast microphone in your closet for 8 years and never used it? And my logical brain went, so your grand idea to replace $500,000 a month in
it's a
revenue,
podcast.
and you're not on the internet, you've been off social media since you walked away and deleted 1 million followers or gave away 1 million followers. Like nobody knows who you are. You're going to launch a podcast from the ground up. And I was like, I guess so. And then that was the start of my show 600 episodes ago,
Well,
which has led me connections like this, opportunity, men of faith, people to speak into me, business opportunities. And so like, to your point, I think it's such a valid point. And the only thing that I wrestle with is I wrestle with the flesh, right? Like this is why I love the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis,
yeah.
right? The devil's in the details, because when you're in the details, you're not in your heart and you're not with God, right? Like you're in stagnation, the devil's dominion, and it's preventing action. And so like, it's such a relevant topic and point, and it's so powerful.
Yeah, 100% agree. There's the thing I love about you is even though right now I think that you see it as like, well, I'm newer in faith, I'm just now learning about this stuff. I wish I was more like these people. I would challenge that. I wouldn't say almost. I would challenge that to say Jesus, when he's talking to his disciples in the Gospels, he says we need to be more like this child. And having childlike faith, you are so much more powerful like that than
Mm.
you ever will be if you know every single address in the Bible, you know every single name that I can't pronounce in Deuteronomy. If because the thing is like that's what he says. He says if you want to enter into the kingdom, you have to be more like this child.
Mm.
And there's so many times I found myself knowing head knowledge about who God is, but not knowing him in my heart. The thing is, if you're more, you know, you understand this being a father. I'm a father too. Is being a dad, they trust you that there's going to be the lights on. They trust you there's going to be food. They trust you that you're going to be able to help them out when they get stuck in something. There's a trust level there where they're not having to ask you. They just know. And when you just know, you don't have to have this innate wisdom, as we all call it. You just know. It's a heart, it's a knowing. And that's my encouragement to you is you're doing great. I mean, the thing is the way that you talk about the Father, that is what it's all about. If you Jesus talks about it. We actually hear about it in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. But it says, "What is the two greatest commandments?" He asked the Pharisee this. It's like to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second one is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. If you do those two things, you're doing great, and you have faith that can move mountains. You only need a little bit to do a lot, and I just know because it sounds. And this is what I love so much about your story and this is my challenge to other Christians hearing this, is it doesn't have to be a linear path. Especially if you're a business owner, you understand that there is no such thing as a linear path when it comes to business. But I'm
Mm-mm.
just saying in life in general, God found you. It says in the Bible that he will speak to you through nature. So that means if you go down all these alternative routes, but it leads you back to him, does that mean that you did something wrong? No. That's just how you encountered him. And that's a beautiful thing about who Christ is. It's a beautiful thing about who God is he will find you on your path and bring you back because of his love for you and nothing else. Now, of course, we always hear about the blessings and see these other things. I'm reading through Acts again for like the fifth time, but you see the power that comes upon the apostles' lives, not because of anything else, but the love of Christ for them, and them going out and impacting people. And that's just what I hear from you in your story is, yeah, there's hard times. I understand. We're both going through some difficult things, but it's a legacy you leave. Even this Saturday, my son and I, we were in Oklahoma City. He was having his state robotics competition, and we went to go get lunch. And so we go and get lunch, and it's in between the competition, and we were going to head back. And when we did, the car wouldn't start. And
Mm.
so I'm like, oh, okay, we're 30 minutes away. We got to be there in 40 minutes. So then I turn it back off, try to turn it back on. It just clicks. And this happens 5 times in a row. And I look over, my son doesn't ask me any questions. He just starts praying. And then I was like, okay. And I started praying, and he's literally out loud praying over the car. And then fired right up. And then we made our way down. So the thing is I think of, there's so many times in my flesh, want my son to do things the way I would want him to do it. He just doesn't understand. He doesn't see things like this. He doesn't do that. But if he gets nothing else from me, but he knows how to talk to the real father, then I've done good.
Mm. Thank you for that, man. That spoke to my soul in a good way. Because like I just posted my testimony on my podcast like a week and a half ago, and it was something that had been on my heart like a lot. And I was like, yeah, but the story is like 25 years, right? Like it's not like one
Mm-hmm.
moment. There's hundreds of moments, right? Like coincidences are just us getting out of God's way kind of moments,
Yeah.
right? And I like had it on my list, and it was like I wasn't procrastinating on it, but I was like thinking about it and ruminating on it. And I was like, well, what about this part? And there's this vein and there's this story. Like it has to make sense, and boom, boom, boom. And then like in true nature, my calendar was empty like a month and a half ago, right? For a couple of days. And randomly on Instagram, right around when you messaged me, 3 people reached out and they're like, dude, we'd love to have you on the show. We want to talk about customer journey. We want to talk about marketing. We want to talk about business. I'm like,
Yep.
great, let's do it. Right. I say yes. And I get them all scheduled the next 2 days because I had openings. Right. And I was like, I love doing podcasts. It's like
Yeah. Same.
my preaching, right? Like I suck at writing. Like I think God gave me the gift of communication and stories and metaphors and all these things. And each one of these shows within 2 minutes ends up in faith. All of them were former pastors, 23
Wow.
years, 17 years, like 14 years, has a ministry, had a $20 million church that burnt down, prayed to God. God had him donate it to another mission. Like, and I'm like, and every one of them at the end of the show are like, where's your testimony? And I was like, and so I literally ended one and I was like, record. And I was like, whatever comes out, comes out. And even in the episode, I'm like in my head in tears. I'm like, I hope this makes sense. And I hope, whatever. And like just trusting that call and that heart. And even my CEO, she's been a woman of faith and has prayed for me since day one, because like I was the guy who dropped F-bombs like every 2 minutes.
Yep.
I don't cuss at all. And God removed it in like a
Wow.
day. And it was one pastor who said something along the lines to me, is like, the only time Paul wanted to separate himself from the Father is he used profanity. And it like rocked my body. And it was God. And I've like cried to her numerous times and like, why me? Why me? Like, I feel like the least qualified to have somebody feel the love of God and the least blank. And she looked at me and she's like, I kind of see you as like God's Terry Tate office linebacker for evil. Like, so unassuming and so unexpected. And you have tattoos and a bald head and everybody thinks you're a UFC fighter. And then you just end up loving everybody. And I'm like, okay, got it. And I appreciate like your perspective, because I think, for me, and like I dive into the Bible and I consume a lot because it like speaks to my soul. And like, I kind of go in what's here, and it's just like, I'm just always reminded of like Job. And then like, even the part where it says like, summarize, like, never get too comfortable standing tall because tomorrow it could all be gone. And like, it's not the people who plant the seeds that reap the harvest. It's the ones that tend to the field, and then always go the second mile when somebody goes the first. And for me, and like the way that my brain works, maybe it's all the brain injuries that God gave me and all this other stuff, but like I need like a lyric to remember. Like that's how I anchor things in. And I have like sticky notes everywhere, and I like speak in like hooks. And it's like one of my favorite ones for myself for the last year or so. Before I recommitted, I was still dancing with faith and like in consuming Stephen and Anthony Mitchell and all these people that were speaking to my heart. I just kept writing it on my paper. And I'm like, you forget that when you ask God to move mountains, you wake up with a shovel. And like, that's been like my consistent.
That's really good.
Yeah. And like, I said it to myself and I was like, oh yeah. Yeah. Like there's this point where it's like, I can sit on my hands all I want and I can pray. And I was like, but the other part is when I'm like, when God calls, the only time I lose is when I don't pick up the phone. And if it's in front of me, he put it there.
Yep.
And even if my flesh can't figure it out, or I'm like, this is the hardest conversation I'm ever going to have, or like, how? My job's not to ask how. My job is to walk in faith. And what carried me through this divorce, like, and it's somewhere in Isaiah like 43, but it was basically as I continue to walk through the hostile, inhospitable wilderness, constantly walking away from what was and walking towards what will be, you will refresh me with living streams of water. And the only thing I remembered is idle hands are the devil's playgrounds and idle moments. And I'm like, go, just go. And it's just this flexing over and over of like trust and faith and like just releasing the fleshly egoic control, or even the illusion, the false illusion of control. And it's really powerful. And something you said at the beginning of the show too, I want to hit because it's on my heart. The biggest mistake I've ever made in the lens of answering your question is ever allowing worldly possessions, worldly status, or anything I've ever achieved to become my identity, because it's not who I am as a man. And like, I'm honest, like today, I'm probably like a B+ dad, and I'm like an A- partner. And on this podcast, I feel like I'm maybe like a low A and doing okay and speaking in my heart. But also there's so much power in that perspective, because if I'm aware I'm a B+, not because of what I've achieved or what I've done, that I have the ability to make improvement and to walk in God's honor and to share more love and to do it. And I've had a rule in business since day one that like, if I ever get too big for my britches, take it away from me, because everybody has a first step.
Yeah.
And it's the only people that remember that and focus on that and honor people there, because I've been at my own first step thousands of times, and it's because of everybody else's ability to like speak into me or give me the time of day. And I think I crave human connection more than anything, because like it just brings peace and love and purpose to the time that we have in this short life here before we go for eternity. And I'm like, well, if we're here, we might as well extract every ounce of love out of it and pour into people and like just build the bridges and build those connections. And so like, I never want to be the guy who says no. Like I've been over 100 people's first podcast. They're like, why? I'm like,
Well,
because you asked. Like, who am I to think that I am? But I don't. So what? I figured out a marketing thing, or so what? I scaled that company. Like, great. You know what's going to
yeah.
happen is like God's going to humble me with some sickness, and I'm going to need every one of you. And how I treated you, or didn't treat you, or didn't make myself available is going to be the thing that prevents you from speaking into me or coming up to support me. And I think that that's the thing that I'm so bullish on, because even in my business and what I coach people on and like scaling companies, I'm like, yeah, I talk about marketing and mindset and customer journey and all these things, but really they're just Trojan horses for us to love each other, like just to
Mm-hmm.
be in community and like live in abundance and like speak into each other, like collaboration over competition all day. And I just think that that's the thing that God's put on my heart.
There's Yeah, man, you are definitely, God's hand is on your life. It reminds me of, I have a mentor. Her name is Taffany. Taffany's amazing, and she said this to me right as the business was going away. It was hilarious. When I remember when I first met her, we're doing over 100K a month. I mean, we're probably doing about 100, 150. And we walk into this restaurant. I'm feeling like a baller. I'm just like, I'm gonna take care of breakfast. I'm gonna let her know it's like we're good to go. And then she sits down. She's very prophetic. And she's just staring at me, and she goes, "Hey, you went through this at 17. You went through these different things, and it's like stuff that my parents don't know, and stuff that my wife didn't know." And I'm just sitting there, and I go, "Never mind." Just got got humbled big time. That it's not about the money. That there's stuff that is seen and unseen. And it was crazy because then about almost a year later, we're sitting in a spot where all that's gone. And I remember sitting there, and she said, "Many are called, but few are chosen." And she said, "You have been chosen for such a time as this." And I just remember, because that's also in the Bible as well. But I sit there and I just think about your story, and I think about everything that you've been through. Like I said, I'm reading through Acts. It's actually very timely that I ended up hitting this chapter. I think it's Acts chapter 10, but it might be 9 or 10, is when Paul has his Damascus Road experience. And it's just so incredible because, I mean, he's sitting there, you're reading through Acts, you hear Stephen's getting stoned. It said that everyone threw their coats at the feet of this young Jew called Saul. And so Saul's like, yeah, kill this guy named Stephen because he's talking about the wrong stuff. And then you see him, he's going in, he's killing Christians, he's persecuting Christians. The only reason he's on the road to Damascus is because he asked the leading priest to be able to go, like, give me the power to go and find all these people and bring them back in chains. That's what it says. And on the way, Jesus himself blinds this man and says, "Why are you persecuting me?" And he says, "Lord, I don't even know who you are." He said, "I'm the one that you've been persecuting." And that's when he has this moment, and it says, "Go into the city." And he goes into the city. And this is why I think it's so beautiful if you go through and you just read all, because Paul writes a majority of the New Testament. If you go and you actually read what he's been through, his reputation precedes him everywhere. He's blind in this city. And the Lord shows up in a dream to this other guy and says, "Hey, go and heal Saul." And he goes, "Isn't that the guy who's literally here to lead us all back and enslave us and make us prisoners and do all these things?" And Jesus is like, "Yeah, he's changed. I need you to go pray for him." And they go and pray for him, and he's out there doing miracles, signs, and wonders. And Saul becomes this huge leading force for Christianity. But he goes back to Jerusalem with Christians, and they want to introduce him to the other believers there, and nobody will meet him because they said, "You're just the guy a few chapters ago who killed somebody and was cool with it, and you're killing all these Christians." That was his reputation everywhere. And the thing is instead of running from it, he leans into it. And as you see, as his progression of being a Christian, the one thing that evolves is he says, "I am this guy who killed Christians. I was the one who was martyring believers." And he said, "If Jesus can find use for me, he can find use for you too." I mean, he's the one who celebrated being in prison, in chains. And he said, "Hey, I'm not stuck in here with them. They're stuck in here with me." And he's just sitting there with a Roman guard attached to him all the time, every day, and he's able to preach. And I just sit there and I think about your story is the reason why God has chosen you and you have his favor on your life is because your story is not everyone else's story. Your story is different. He has given you a voice and you're out here using it, and you're able to impact because you're able to do two things. You're able to walk this line of the Christian faith, and you're able to speak to what believers are walking through, but also you've been in the world too. and you know what the world looks at, because it says that man looks at the outside, but God looks at the heart. That still means that man's still looking at the outside. So you still have all these successes that bring people in where they feel like this is what they need. Then you give them what they actually need. This is what I want. I want to learn how to be more like this. I want to be able to make more money. I want to know the customer journey. You bring them in, and then it's, oh, hey, let me introduce you to someone that can help you with a real customer journey, with a real relationship. Let me introduce you to Jesus. And whether you do it outrightly or just through the way that you love people, this is always my encouragement to Christians. You do not have to be a Christian business owner to be a Christian in business. Just love people different. They will ask you questions. Wait, this is when everyone else gets mad at me. This is when everyone else is yelling at me. This is when everyone else, all of our hair is on fire because of Black Friday and Cyber Monday. How do you have peace right now? How are you able to go through the hardest time of your life and smile and still get on podcasts and still run your business and still love on people? Well, let me tell you about this guy. And that's why I'm just so excited for you. It's the mindset behind it all. And that's why he's chosen you.
Bro, I didn't realize that I was coming to church today and having my bucket filled, but like everything lands, man. And it actually brings peace to a lot of the flesh that I wrestle with, because it's this like double-edged sword where it's like the word righteousness comes up, right? Like, under my Father and under God, like I get to be righteous and live in confidence and live in belief. And then there's this line, like the awareness I have of humility. And, everyone asks me like, what's some of the biggest lessons that I've learned? And like, one of them is like navigating the divorce. Was like, there were situations that I was put into that I was told like I wouldn't see my kids again, and everyone's like, don't go, like do this. And my heart was like, go.
Wow.
Like, just do this. And like, I trusted it. And it was a dark season. And the only mistake I've ever made is I let my ego take credit for it, because I look back now, man, and I'm like, no. It was all God over and over again. And you even speaking what you just speaks to so many things that like my ego struggles with, right? Because of like, it's interesting because in my body, I don't feel shame anymore. I don't feel guilt anymore. I don't feel any of those. Like, I feel nothing but gratitude and grace. But my logical brain, where the devil plays, in my opinion, right? That's why I say the devil's in the details.
Yep.
That's where it comes from. And that's why I love the Screw Tape Letters, because he's like, just give them enough science to think it's their idea. Like, just give them enough for them to think that they're making progress. And I was like, oh man, that's like blind faith thing. But it's like, it's also a muscle over and over and over again. And even your point too, like we talked about this at church on Sunday, like to your point about Paul, like he wrote most of those books in prison. And even like 2 Timothy, which was like the last one he wrote on the earth, like the only reason he was there is because of situations that led him there to be able to do that. And like, even in the vein of like the history, because it's been the last month at church, my pastor's incredible, talking about the good roads. Like, it was the Roman soldiers who spread Christianity throughout the entire empire through the things that they experienced differently, not the things that were said and the things that were preached, but like the experience itself shifted their perspective, and they are the ones who spread a lot of that message.
Oh, dude,
lands deeply.
There's so many there. So I read this. I think this is in Acts as well, but it talks about Philip, and this is why it's so important just to listen and be obedient, no matter what it is. Being obedient definitely, usually in the moment, it doesn't make any sense. But I just remember there's a story about Philip in Acts, and he's walking along the road, and the Lord tells him, hey, go run up next to this chariot. And so he just runs up next to the chariot, and inside the chariot was a eunuch to this queen of Ethiopia. And he's listening, and so the guy's reading through, I think it's Isaiah, and he's reading through, and Philip says, hey, do you understand what you're reading? And the guy goes, how am I supposed to? It's like, I can't understand this. How am I supposed to understand this? And he asks him, he's like, would you like to? So he hops in the chariot with him, and then they're sitting there and they're going through it. And then this guy ends up giving his life to Christ, and they pull over on the side of the road and says, hey, there's a body of water right there. Why can't I get baptized now? Gets baptized. And it says when he comes up that Philip is taken away. It says that the Spirit of the Lord takes Philip away, and the eunuch never sees him again. So a moment, the guy comes up, and then all of a sudden the dude who baptized him is gone. And what's cool is if you actually follow that story, the eunuch goes back to Ethiopia, and then that he is the father of faith to the African nations. So the one act of obedience, running next to a chariot, you don't even get to see the fruit because you get teleported to the next city. And it just says that Philip lands in this other town, preaches, and then just keeps going all the way to Caesarea. It's like, how did, it's like, wait, one act of obedience changed so much of how the entire world sees Christianity. And I always just find it so interesting when people try to refute how Christianity is and how it started. And it's like 11 out of the 12 apostles, the original disciples, died horrible deaths. I said one of them was boiled alive and lived and then was exiled. This is so how many of us have beliefs so strong that we would die for it? How many of us would get boiled alive, live, and still hold on to it the same way you did before? Nothing changed for him. Nothing changed for John. So for me, is I just sit there and I think about that. And the thing is you've blessed me just by being here because of your story and what you're walking through and what you're willing to do, even though it may not look like how you want it to look, even though it's been these hard seasons. It gives me encouragement. And especially, I mean, dude, you and I are so similar in that way where it's the logical mind, because I'll sit there and I'll logically go, okay, this is what I need to do. This is how I need to make things line up. It's like, this is what my plans are. This is what I think is going to work really well. And then the Holy Spirit will say to do something else. And I'll go, but that makes no sense. Like, there's no way. When I sit there and I go A, B, C, D, E, there's nothing on this that says to do anything that you're saying. Then you just sit there and you got to make a choice. It's like, who do you listen to? And you get to choose. That's a beautiful thing about free will is you can choose. But for me, is I intrinsically every single day I just ask God all the time. I will ask Him what to wear. Hey, do I wear this or do I wear that? Hey, what are we doing today? Like, I just ask Him because He sees things I don't see. We are human. We can only see so far. But He is an infinite God who sees our past, present, and the future. So He's going to tell you to do things that make zero sense because we can only see right now. And then the cool thing is, though, same thing I was saying about Philip, it may not be for us to know anyways. Our lives are not our own. Our lives are not for us to understand and for us to be able to manipulate God to have a full plan. The thing is everyone prays for a plan. Lord, just give me a plan. I just want clarity around this one situation. Give me the next steps. Like, what you really are asking for is control. You're not asking for clarity. You're asking for control. If you knew A to Z exactly how your life was going to go in every step, you have control now. It's like having Google Maps. So if you put Google Maps in, it gives you a destination and a path. You have control of knowing exactly which way to go, how long it's going to take for you to get there, where the gas stations are, what restaurants to stop at. Nobody wants clarity. Everyone wants control. And I think that that's what's so beautiful about hearing your story and just even the conversation we're having today is listening to you give up control and watching Him still show up and bless you in ways that make no sense. There's things that you have going on in your life that when I'm sitting there and I'm listening to all the reels and everything else, I'm just like, man, he's still like a 1%er here. There's people that would love to be in the situation that he's in. And the fact that he's able to walk through hard times and still wear it on his shoulder, because that's also the backside of the blessing that most people don't see is when you build something in your own strength, you feel like you have to keep it in your own strength. So all of a sudden you become a little less human. You're not going through anything hard. All of a sudden everything's great. All of a sudden you are the number one leading authority and expert, when really you're just a human too, who has had some extraordinary experiences. And that's why I'm so excited for your journey in your life is you're keeping it real. You're keeping it real with people where they can understand that you are a person going through it too. It doesn't matter about how much money you got in the bank account. It doesn't matter how big your house is, how many cars you got. Sure, you may be able to go cry in a Ferrari, and you still crying because stuff's still going on in your life. Like, it doesn't matter about the car.
Line. You might be able to go cry in a Ferrari, but you're still crying. Like, I love that.
But yeah, man, I honestly thank you so much for being here. I know you got a jet here in a couple minutes, but you have blessed my life. And I'm honored that you've been here. I'm honored that we've been able to have this conversation.
Oh, brother, I hope we become friends and we do this again. Like this.
Dude, I would love to.
This was yeah, like even learning how to discern the voice of God, right? Dreams, intuition, symbols, nature, and other people. Like, you spoke into me a ton today, and like just the right amount of rocket fuel I needed. Like I shared with you this morning. Like, I'm like, how are you? I'm like, oh, it's 11 a.m. I've cried like 30 times today. So it's a good day with God, right?
Yeah.
Like, and even the things that you share, like just prophetically are the things that I face. And, you know, I'm so blessed for my journey and the opportunity. And like, even in the lens of like non-faith, like one of the things that I share all the time is that perspective is the difference between our prison and our power. Right.
That's good.
And truthfully, our perspective only comes through adversity or challenges or
Yep.
obstacle, because, you know, even in the lens of success for people tangibly putting this into practice, it's not that the resistance goes away. It's that your time between resistance and response gets shorter and shorter with more experience to understand how to navigate it. And it's like the greatest gift ever. And I even think like being a parent, right? Like, how old's your son?
He's 10.
Yeah. So mine just turned 8, right?
Well,
And like,
yeah.
I remember like the first year where I'm like, everything, we got to go to the ER. This happened, this happened. Now, like, I'll watch him smash his chin open. I'm like, no, I exactly what to say. Like,
Yeah.
there's like this calm and this peace. And, you know, the way that I internalize this for myself is like, if you and I go on a run and we're like, oh, we want to run a marathon, right? And we're like, all right, cool. Like, we got to run 5K today. And we get near the end of the run, you know, and everybody knows what I'm talking about, where you're like, I want to quit. My muscles hurt. I can't do this. Our brain instantly goes to, but this is making me stronger. So go anyways. And in the lens of business, business is our gym, except we all try to skip the workout
Mm.
and we atrophy because we avoid and try to architect this life or business with no adversity. And the only thing that happens is we die because it's our gym. And the more that you flex that muscle and the more you reframe it into the brain of like, wait, this is working me out. Like, this is helping me be a better leader. Like, this hard conversation is going to make the next ones easier. Like, there's this consistent like flexing of muscles. And I think that like, that's the way that I've reframed it in my brain. I'm like, because on the opposite side of every single one of those roadblocks is something that I haven't seen before, something I haven't felt before, a new PR, a new perspective,
Mm-hmm.
a new way to do business. And I joke too. It's like, you know, the default for a lot of us, especially me as a human, used to be in my whole life when I got a flat tire, instead of calling AAA, I'd slash the other 3 and then complain I couldn't drive. Right. And I'm like, well, what if the flat tire was on purpose? Like, what if there was a reason and it was slow down? Like, hey, change your perspective, go change it. What did we run over? What can we do differently? How can I show up differently? All right, let's change the tire and get back on the road, not like pause the car, slash the other 3, and then wonder why we're not making any progress. And it's been this like collapsing. And truthfully, even for anybody listening to this, I tried to find all this clarity through every other medium that you could ever imagine. And instantly I came home and everything made sense. Like, I look at my childhood, the homelessness, the opiate addictions, the situations, and more people have come home to love and faith just through my perspective in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I'm so grateful for the workout that he's put in front of me. And like, now it's almost like I'm run towards it and I'm like, oh, hard. Okay. Let's go. Right. Like, I'm not alone in this. Ephesians, like, I got the armor of God, I got the voice of God, I got everything in it. And I'm like, there's something in this for me. And like, even when my flesh struggles, I'm like, even if I only take one bite, like, that's a bite of obedience. It's a bite of faith. And it's really, really powerful and profound. And even you, truthfully, and I think I share this on Instagram, like, just showing up as like a blessing in my life, like as a man, as a father, as a partner who has God at the forefront of his relationship, walking in obedience together, like the example that you are, and just like who you choose to be, and speak into me for a couple seconds on Instagram and even invite me on this podcast, I'd flop it the other way because I'm like, why me? I guess it feels like more of a gift than it does for you. And I think that like, that's like the biggest thing, like how you speak, how you articulate, God, like the way that you read and share, like you like spoke into my soul today, like at the deepest level. And I'm like, all right, God, I'm paying attention. Right. Like, I'm paying attention. Like, I prayed to God. Like, I was like, I need more men of faith in my life. Like, I need men that are the embodied example. And like, I'm leaving here to go to a meeting of a guy that's lived in my valley for 4 years. We've talked on Instagram, haven't coordinated anything. The day before Thanksgiving, I was just spending it with my son, and I was just like, God, I really like love community, and I'm missing it locally, and I need some powerful men in my life. And I forgot something at the grocery store, so I go with my son to avoid the holiday. I bump into him at the grocery store. He had just landed, and his wife like, emergency, go to the grocery store as much as you don't want to go. I need this. I end up at his house
Well,
on Thanksgiving and in relationship with him. And then we go hiking together and talk about God for 2 hours. And I was like, and then he showed me on his side that he was praying for more men locally to be able to spread his mission. And I'm like, okay, heard, right? Like, at some point, like, I just realized it's better to just make a bowl of popcorn eat it while I tighten my seatbelt and enjoy the ride.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like there's so much power and profoundness in what you've shared and what you've spoken into me. And hopefully for anybody listening, like just a perspective that gives you a permission slip to lean in somewhere, to lean
That's
into your
good.
faith, to lean into action, to lean into a perspective shift, to lean into a conversation, to lean into something that you get to take the next bite and whatever that looks like for you.
I'm done. Cut the show. I'm done. That's gold. Honestly, brother, I love you.
I
Thank you
love you,
so much
brother.
for being
Thank you.
here. For everyone listening, I'm going to leave his links in the bio below. Make sure to hit him up. Incredible guy. You've heard that over the last 45 minutes. But I'm done. I ain't got nothing else to say. We out of here.